everybody, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Once again, my name is Brad, and I'm on the buying team here at the Boulder Bookstore. So I read a little bit over 100 books every year, and the question I get asked pretty frequently is how do I decide what to read next? There's a bunch of different things that go into it, but one for me is always looking at certain smaller publishers that I tend to trust because they've put out really good books throughout the years. So today I've got 6 different smaller publishers that I'd like to tell you about, and just a little bit about some of their books. Alright. So first I have some books from the New York Review of Books. So they do both modern books, such as Joshua Cohen's Netanyahu's. They also do classic literature as well, like Stalingrad by Vasily Grossman. Kind of just really good literary fiction from around the world. Could be English, could be translated. One of my favorites that I've read recently was Kalima Stories by Varlam Shalamov. Very, very difficult subject matter. It was something I read during quarantine because it made me feel better about what we were going through. This is a gentleman who survived for 17 years through Kalima, which is one of the worst gulags in Russia. When he got out, he didn't feel comfortable talking to anybody because he always assumed somebody was working for the Russian government and he was going to go back to jail. It's a pretty sad story, and he collected 2 volumes. This is the first volume of just brutal, brutal short stories about his time surviving the gulags and just the extreme depths of depravity that he and his fellow inmates had to go through just to survive in horrific, horrific conditions. This was considered the worst of the gulags because it was so far north into Siberia. The temperature was just frozen. If somebody would die, they would just leave them there as opposed to trying to dig through the ground because everything was just ice. Really beautiful, wonderfully written, made me feel better about everything we went through in the last 2 years for sure. Next I have books from Archipelago Press. They're probably most famous for doing the My Struggle series by Karl of Nosgard, which was 6 parts. I like how they do these kind of squarish, smaller books. I like the style of them a lot. They've also done En Amont by Jean Guillemot and Autumn Rounds by Jacques Paulitz. This was one that I read recently. These are all books in translation from this publisher. This was translated from the French. It's a story from Canada about an older gentleman who runs a loan book car. So he drives around and he kind of just gives books to people as a little library. And he thinks this is the last year he's going to do it. But he ends up meeting up with this woman that he falls in love with, and they end up deciding to travel around together for this one last season of him lending books. Really, really wonderful book. Anything that they've published I've really liked. I tend to read their entire catalog every year because I find the books in translation to be very well done and the translations to be very, very well done. Next I have some books from New Directions. New Directions is an imprint of W.W. Norton. They do a lot of international things as well. So for instance, this is the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, which is a new translation, probably the best translation on the market I think to date. And also they just did The Employees by Olga Ravn. This was translated out of Danish. It is a very, very short book about the future. It's a spaceship set about 600 years in the future where there's humans and humanoids, and they start taking on these objects that make the humanoids start acting in a much different way. The book is told through HR reports, so it's just very small segments of conversation from employees talking to HR about what's going on the spaceship. It was shortlisted for the International Booker. It was a lot of fun, it was really weird, and I liked it. Alright, next I have Charco Press. So Charco Press is a smaller publisher out of the UK. They do books in translation, mostly out of Spanish, mostly out of South America. For instance, they did this one, which is Havana Year Zero, which I actually haven't read yet, but I really like the cover. I think it's indicative of their style, just very subtle, very basic kind of covers. They let the story speak for itself. And then Fireflies by Louis Sagasti, which is a really incredible short book about art, and about fireflies, and about asteroids, and about Kurt Vonnegut is through a lot of this story. Another short read, another beautiful work in translation. I read this about 2 years ago and it's still on my mind, so that's probably a pretty good sign. Another favorite small publisher is Deep Vellum. So they're based out of Dallas, Texas. They do fiction, they do nonfiction. They actually have a few of their own imprints now as well, which is pretty cool. One of the nonfictions they did recently was After the Oracle, which is kind of a self-help book, but kind of not, and it's about basketball, but also just about life. which was really good. Their new upcoming book, which I'm really excited about, is Country of Origin by Dalia Azim. So this is a story of a young girl who's growing up in Egypt in really difficult times and wants to escape, and eventually she does flee to New York with a man who her father is not very pleased with at the time. So it's about her getting away, and it's also about her daughter being raised in the United States after she decides to run back to Egypt. Dalia is a wonderful person. I really liked this story, and the back and forth between the cultures was interesting. And then lastly, I have Riverhead books. So Riverhead is an imprint of Random House. They do a lot of really wonderful books, literary fiction mostly. They did Virtue by Hermione Hobie, which is a local author. We do have autographed copies left, which is lovely. And they publish my absolute favorite author on the planet, whose name is Marlon James. Marlon James I've spoken about probably in almost every video that I've ever recorded for the store. This is his newest one. It just came out this past Tuesday. This is the second book in the Black Leopard Red Wolf cycle. This book I think is more concise and more linear than the first book. I find the character to be more sympathetic, more empathetic, while being a badass bitch who doesn't take no for an answer. She's wonderful. This is the story of Queen Sogalon. It takes place 177 years before what happens in Black Leopard Red Wolf, and you see her just evolve over this 200-year span to become who she was in the first book. Made me question everything about the first book and made me want to go back and reread it in light of how she sees everything that happened. Really wonderful. He's incredible. Read everything he's ever written. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to subscribe. Please feel free to come back and give us a call. We're here most days.